English 2010 gang. Wish we were doing this presentation in class, but given the situation in the world, we kind of have to do it this way, and that's okay. I hope you all are finding a way to enjoy quarantine, whatever your situation may be, and that you're making the most of the situation. I've watched all of you, or not all of them, but most of your presentations, and they're great. I love them. It reminded me of some of the lessons that I learned. I have some props here that are going to help me maybe describe some of the lessons that I learned, some of my biggest takeaways each sprint and each week. Maybe you remember in the intro week, one of the first days of class, we learned to make paper airplanes, right? And we talked about planning, and we tried to plan to see how many we could make and how we could be most efficient. And that taught me a lot of things, you know. I'm using that a lot in my other classes in life, you know. I'm trying to figure out how to plan things appropriately so that they can be executed better. And that's a lesson that will help me not only as I plan out, you know, essays and papers and content I want to produce, but my life and my job and anything like that. In Sprint 1, we talked, I guess, we had the research project, right? Shout out to my group, you were amazing. One thing I learned is that there's an order to things, right? I think one thing we did is we researched before we made a research plan. And so at that point, the research plan is kind of pointless and our research wasn't as effective. So I definitely learned there's an order to things. Just like this little puzzle here, if you put it together appropriately, right, you can kind of move it around and it stays. But if you move pieces out and if they're not in the right order, then things start to fall apart, and it's not as simple as just putting it back together. Everything's got to be in its place. In Sprint 2, we learned about stasis theory, and that was one of the best lessons that I learned. You know, there's every argument or every controversy is a funnel, right? And you got to figure out where your funnel's clogged. Maybe you disagree about the definition of something. Maybe you disagree about whether it's good or bad, or what you should do about it. Or maybe there's not even a debate to be had. That really helped me put some things in context, especially as we kind of approach an election season. Analyzing things from that perspective, where do they disagree? Because sometimes I think you'll notice even they don't understand that. Sprint 3, I learned about pancake drafts, right? I was amazed. I didn't think it would work really when I heard about it. I thought it was kind of silly. But then I did it, and I produced a piece of content over and over and over again. I went back and looked, and honestly, as a whole, one by one, they weren't very good. But I found paragraphs or sentences or ways of saying things that I really liked in each of them. And then you're kind of able to highlight what you like and Frankenstein your final thing together and do some nice touch-ups, and it turns out really nice. So it's definitely something that I'll do for the rest of my college experience and for the rest of my life. One second. Sprint 4, I think we all learned to adapt to change, right? It was Sprint 4, we had spring break, we transitioned online, all of that happened in a couple weeks. And, you know, maybe I didn't handle it the best. I think we all probably had some things we wish we would have handled better. But at the end of the day, you learn from failure, you learn from mistakes. And change is something that's going to be constant in school, in your job, in your life, in your family. Change will always happen. And that's something we need to learn to adapt to and to change. So hopefully we all learned that lesson of how to adapt to change. Sprint 5, one of my skills shows was focused on a concept of abduction. And abduction is helping the reader or the viewer come to a conclusion that is different than they otherwise might expect. And so I have some movies here. They're not necessarily my favorite movies, but a lot of people think they're great movies. And I like them all. And the reason they're so good is because throughout the movie, you expect something to happen, or you expect something not to happen. And every clue seems to be leading to this happening, and then it doesn't, right? And then they take you back and they show you kind of how it happened. I've got an Adidas hat here. Sprint 6, I learned about emotional branding. I'm part of a community now. I've got my Adidas hat and I've got my Under Armour shirt, and I'm a part of those communities, right? Invoking emotion into a reader or into a viewer is super important. It has really some big effects. And if you can emotionally charge your position, and if you can get the viewer or the reader to have an emotional experience talking about your position, it'll be really good. And then in the wrap-up, I learned that contributing to something consistently, even at a small rate, can bring great results, right? I flipped this little hourglass a little bit ago, and as you look at it, it's such a small hole and such a small amount of sand coming through from the top part of the container to the bottom that in a moment it doesn't look like much, right? But after only a minute, 60 seconds, all of the sand from the top has been transferred to the bottom. And that's kind of how I felt as I assembled my final portfolio. You know, I didn't feel like I'd done perfectly, and I definitely hadn't done perfectly all throughout the semester, but I ended up assembling my final portfolio, and I was really proud of what I'd learned and what I'd done. And so anything in life, if you produce consistently, and even if it's small, you'll end up with great results. And those are some of the lessons I learned in English 2010. It's not all of them, but some of my biggest takeaways, and I hope you had some great takeaways as well. Thanks, class.